Chapter 31 of Resurrections, Part 2. They walked in silence for a time, weaving between the rocks and peering into the darkness ahead. Was this the ghastly gorge? Some distant Badlands canyon? Dry, dead trees hunched over them with a menacing air, their branches curling down like claws that flexed and rattled in the wind. Sometimes she would turn, and her heart would skip a beat when she saw a face, only to realize it was just a pattern in the rock, the illusion disappearing as soon as she took another step. If Twilight stopped and spent too long squinting in one direction, stars would begin twinkling at the edges of her vision. A dim circular light appeared in the distance, followed shortly by 5 more. They bobbed and shifted as they moved from left to right, then disappeared around a corner where the two paths in the canyon intersected.
Over there!
Twilight sped into a trot, her and Midnight's hoofsteps echoing behind her. They stopped as they reached the corner, peeking around. A party of several ponies were navigating the canyon in a dispersed but strict formation, lanterns hanging from their belts casting a pale silvery light into the night. At first, Twilight thought they were royal guards, but after a moment, more details jumped out at her. Their armor had more coverage than the guards she knew, with long metal greaves protecting their legs, helmets crowned with sharp steel horns, and muzzles encased in hooked metal beaks. They scanned the canyon through narrow slits in a curtain of chainmail that hung to their shoulders, guarding their throats and giving them the appearance of faceless beaked griffins. Rather than the polished gold of the royal guards from Twilight's time, these ponies wore armor of gleaming steel. Complex runes were engraved into the metal with intricate patterns of silver inlay. Small diamonds were set into the runes, glittering like constellations as the lantern light hit them. Some of the ponies carried barbed pikes against their shoulders, the hilts decorated with the same diamond and silver runes as their armor. Others pulled heavy arbalists on sleds behind them, with bolts the size of a pony strapped to the sides. At the head of the group stood Princess Luna, wearing a far less encumbering but similarly decorated set of armor. Her face and neck were unprotected, allowing her ethereal mane of starry firmament to billow out behind her. Though she was no longer the size of a young filly, she was still smaller than the Luna Twilight knew, standing only a few inches taller than her guards. Midnight hummed, speaking in a thoughtful whisper.
They're hunting something. How can you know?
Twilight asked, watching as the group came to a stop. Luna's horn glowed, her eyes squinting into the darkness.
I know what a predator looks like,
Midnight said.
That mare is not prey.
Twilight pursed her lips.
We should be careful.
Princess Luna stopped abruptly, her wings flaring out and revealing the silvery blade strapped to their sides. Immediately, her entourage spread out, setting their lanterns down ahead of her and forming into a pair of measured lines with the ease of obvious practice. The first line rolled their shoulders, stabbing the sharp butts of their pikes into the ground and leveling their long, sharp heads on the darkness ahead. The ponies of the second line shrugged their yokes from their shoulders and turned their arbalists to face forwards, rushing to load the huge bolts into massive weapons. Twilight watched with bated breath, looking anxiously from the guards to Luna's stern expression to the dark canyon. The silver lantern framed long, eerie shadows that danced across the rocky walls as the arbalist gunners spun heavy winches attached to their weapons with both forehooves, tightening the powerful springs. Luna's horn glowed. A lantern floated off the ground wrapped in the pale blue of her magic and flew forwards, hitting the ground with a loud crack of breaking glass. Rather than go out, the silver light inside drifted upwards in a stream of tiny glowing motes, the wind carrying it deeper into the canyon. The earth under the shattered lantern erupted with a tremendous ear-splitting roar. Boulders the size of a wagon flew through the air like pebbles, bouncing off the walls and cracking into a dozen pieces. An impenetrable cloud of dust was thrown up by the explosion, swirling and twisting around some huge mass within. Twilight caught a brief glimpse of pitch-black limbs and twinkling stars as the ground shuddered under hoof, the vibration of crumbling stone and the sound of grinding rock combining into a single, heart-stopping sensation that made her teeth chatter and her bones ache. When Twilight looked to Luna, the alicorn was nowhere to be seen. The guards in the front row adjusted their stances, and the runes engraving the long hafts of their pikes began to glow and hum. Gradually, the dust began to settle, and Twilight found herself squinting in confusion at the thing within. At first, it looked like a curtain of stars, stretching across the canyon from wall to wall, but she couldn't see anything behind it. Where there should have been more craggy rock and winding walls, there was only impenetrable blackness. The stars shifted, and Twilight gasped as the wall rushed forwards. It lurched and skittered, the movement allowing her to pick out the shape of its 6 stomping legs. A pair of thick claws emerged from the mass as it reared up and unleashed a furious hiss, a pointed stinger bobbing and twitching at the end of a bulbous tail behind it. The silver-armored ponies roared back, angling their pikes towards the monster as it fell onto them. There was a near-splitting crack, and for a split second the entire canyon was illuminated with pale silver light. Twilight could barely see the shape of the beast outlined by the harsh shadows wrapped around it, its body writhing and twisting in fury. A massive scorpion, its arching tail reaching all the way to the craggy lip of the canyon, and its vanta-black carapace absorbing all light, but for the star-like pinpricks of white dotting the surface. The moment was gone as quick as it came. The scorpion flinched away from the clash, and the deep shadows of night rushed in to fill the canyon once more.
That's a scorpius malice,
Twilight whispered, eyes widening in recognition. She had done some reading after her confrontation with the Ursa Minor in Ponyville, fascinated by the creature's astrobiology.
They were wiped out centuries ago, even before Nightmare Moon. Then this is another vision of the past,
Midnight said.
These aren't just dreams, they're memories.
The twang of thick cords bounced off the canyon walls as 2 of the arbalisters fired, launching a pair of huge bolts into the scorpion's bulk. One ricocheted away, but the other punched through its carapace, the impact accompanied by another flash of bright silver light. Behind the scorpius, revealed by the light, descended Princess Luna. She landed on the monster's back with her wings flared, a ring of weapons orbiting her like murderous silver moons glowing in her magic. She pierced the creature's thick shell with a pair of broad-headed spears, drawing an anguished shriek from its maw. It whirled, swinging with one heavy claw and lunging with its tail as she leapt off of its back, throwing a trio of spinning axes in a rapid 1-2-3 beat, each of the heavy heads striking through the night like comets before smacking home with the sound of cracking glass. Turning to confront Luna, the Scorpius exposed its back to the double line of her escorts. The 2 remaining arbalists fired, each one striking squarely and burying deep into the monster's flanks. It howled, stumbling to one side and smacking into a canyon wall. The earth shuddered as stones rained from above, bouncing off steel armor and starry carapace alike.
The books I read never explained what happened to the Scorpius,
Twilight said, watching the fight in awe.
No pony ever knew. They just disappeared along with so many other deadly creatures. Your equestrian scholars are naive fools,
Midnight scoffed.
Monsters do not disappear. They are slain.
Princess Luna and her soldiers worked in perfect synchrony. Whenever the Scorpius rounded on the tight formation of armored escorts, Luna would coalesce in the shadows behind it, burying her weapons into its astral flesh. As it turned to defend itself from her, the soldiers would harass it with their pikes and bolts, drawing its attention again, and the cycle would repeat. And despite its fury, the scorpius was helpless. Gradually, its movements slowed and its screeches weakened. Its sleek, nearly invisible carapace took on the appearance of a porcupine as spears, swords, axes, and bolts stuck through its shell. Luna lashed out with a long scythe, carving its limbs away one by one. First its tail, then a minute later a leg, until finally it collapsed onto its side, wheezing and growling ineffectively. Luna landed gracefully next to the monster's head, her hooves alighting in its viscous, sparkling black blood. It hissed as she lifted her scythe, the only weapon still remaining in her magic from the dozen she had started with, and stabbed it into the side of its head. The scorpius spasmed, every limb twitching for several seconds, then fell still.
But that doesn't make any sense.
Twilight's brow furrowed in thought.
Did Luna kill every monster in Equestria? That's absurd. And why wouldn't it be in books? She would have been a hero.
The silver-armored soldiers straightened stiffly out of their combat stances, exchanging glances through their armored faces. They fell out of their formation, pulling out axes and knives as they began clambering over the scorpius corpse.
Would she?
Twilight looked to her side, meeting Midnight's thoughtful gaze.
Would you think she's a hero? For killing monsters?
Twilight's eyes widened.
Midnight?
She was interrupted by a sudden pain stabbing at the base of her horn. Twilight cried out, collapsing onto her side as all the heat was sucked from her body at terrifying speed. She looked up, teeth chattering, and saw Princess Luna standing over her with a hateful glare, scythe raised and dripping starry blood from its curved tip. Twilight raised a shivering huff.
Luna, wait!
The scythe arced down, filling her vision with the silver light reflecting off of its blade. Twilight flinched as a rumbling boom filled her ears, and a wave of prickly heat washed over her coat. She gasped, opening her eyes and blinking up at a clear blue sky. Luna was nowhere to be seen, but she could hear ponies screaming, shattering glass, and pounding hooves. She climbed back to her hooves as she looked around. Ponies ran in every direction around her, chased by packs of grinning changelings. One mare shrieked as she was tackled from behind and dragged down, immediately swarmed by a dozen chattering changelings that dragged her away screaming. Fires blazed all over the marbled streets, engulfing storefronts and hugging the city's gold-banded towers, casting long, dancing shadows across the pitted cobbles.
Canterlot.
Midnight appeared beside her, scanning the chaotic scene around them.
This is the day it fell. The changeling attack.
Twilight nodded, recovering from the abrupt transition as she took in her surroundings.
But I don't remember Luna being at the wedding.
She frowned, trying to find the princess's distinctive blue coat.
She must be close. You said aimless walking works, yes?
Midnight broke into a brisk trot without waiting for an answer, slipping around a pair of royal guards locked in combat with half a dozen drones.
What? Hey, wait!
Twilight ran after her, mind racing and chest heaving. Had Princess Luna been in Canterlot during the attack? Why hadn't Twilight seen her? Was there a chance that Twilight might see another of herself as Luna remembered her? Her recollection of the wedding was still hazy. She remembered Chrysalis revealing herself and defeating Celestia, and then a frantic run for the elements, but after that it was just violence and noise. Twilight's heart wrenched as she dodged between panicked ponies and snarling changelings, jumped over limp bodies, and ran through billowing clouds of angry black smoke. Were these real memories? of real ponies that had died just out of sight of her centuries ago? Or just imagined scenes created by Luna's mind to fill in what she hadn't personally witnessed? It felt so terribly real. And everywhere she looked, she saw visions of the future, of dead streets cluttered with bones and crumbling bricks. All of these ponies were going to die, had died. Even the ones that escaped today would be dead within months, lost in the floods. All because she hadn't been there for them. The screams around her mixed with the ones from her memories, each one like a spear driven into her breast. And the fact that she was letting herself be distracted like this right now, when Luna needed her more than ever, only made her hate herself even more. A tingling warmth pressed against her side, pulling her from her reverie. Glancing over, she saw Midnight leaning into her slitted eyes focused forward. Twilight cringed in shame as she realized her other half had noticed her weakness.
Sorry,
she muttered.
We're together,
Midnight said, cutting her off. Her voice was firm and level, and unaccusing. Twilight flinched, having expected some cutting remark about her episode, only to blink in confusion when it never came. She opened her mouth, but couldn't think of anything to say.
Look, ahead.
Twilight blinked the wetness from her eyes, bringing the street back into focus. She gasped as she saw Princess Celestia, her pristine white coat stained with blood and smoke, but her posture as regal as always. The princess lit her horn, brilliant sunlight flooding the street around her and sending changelings stumbling back with angry hisses. Royal guards galloped forth, driving their spears into the stunned changelings and then dragging shocked civilians back inside a formation gathered protectively behind Princess Celestia. The princess pointed forwards, her voice cutting through the mayhem as clear as day. "Keep going, my little ponies! Do not stop!" She led the way, her glowing horn leaving a trail of dazed changelings behind her for the guards to finish off, as wide-eyed civilians followed close behind. At the rear of the procession, Princess Luna ran into view, her lips set into a stern frown. A group of changelings surged from an alley, trying to grab at some of the ponies in the formation. Luna snarled, a sparkling white star zipping from her horn. It pierced the closest changeling's chest like an arrow before emerging from its back, arcing through each of the invaders in quick succession, and then returning to the tip of her horn. The changelings fell into fresh puddles of green ichor, twitching.
Luna!
Twilight shouted, but the princess did not hear her call. Instead, she ran after the group of fleeing civilians, striking down any changelings that tried to attack. Midnight was already quickening into a gallop. Twilight put on speed as they reached an intersection, rounding the edge of a smoking corner store, and a wave of nausea swelled in Twilight's gut. She grunted, squeezing her eyes shut as the world spun around her. And when she opened them, she found herself standing in a wide room of smooth wooden walls and broken floor-to-ceiling windows. She blinked, looking around at the tables and chairs piled haphazardly in the corners. She could see the streets of Canterlot through the windows. She was on the second floor, with royal guards on alert just outside, while civilians milled anxiously inside their perimeter. Plumes of smoke billowed through the sky, barely a block away.
"We are trapped, sister."
Twilight jumped at the sound of Princess Luna's muffled voice coming from downstairs.
"The changelings have herded us like cattle and hold watch on every approach,"
she continued. She spoke firmly, her tone urgent.
"Our only hope is to clear the path to the train station. Many of our ponies will die if we do that, Luna,"
Celestia answered, calm, but with a clear note of exhaustion.
"We can't protect them if we go on the offensive."
Spotting the stairs, Twilight began to creep across the room, placing each hoof carefully. She didn't know if Luna would be able to hear her or not, but so far, every time the princess had spotted her, it had led to another disorienting transition between dreams, and this was a conversation that Twilight was determined not to miss.
Thou intends to protect them whilst backed against the mountain till the changelings grow bored, then?
Luna countered.
Ponies will die. If we remain here, they shall all die. There must be a way,
Celestia said hoarsely.
I can't order a refugee train to attack, Luna. Even if we make it through, we would lose so many.
Luna let out an audible sigh. Twilight's ear twitched at the scraping of shoes against wood.
There is no other path, sister,
she said quietly.
The wicked queen hath outmaneuvered us. If we cannot pay the toll now, it shall only grow worse.
Midnight appeared at Twilight's side as she reached the top of the stairs. She paused, exchanging a glance with her darker half, and then started down the steps. The stairwell was built into the wall, meaning she wouldn't be able to see the lower floor until she was halfway down.
I wish we didn't have to pay any toll.
Celestia's voice was so soft that Twilight had to stop and strain to make out her words.
I feel the loss of every single pony. Twilight tried to warn me, but I didn't listen. Now all this... it's my fault.
Celestia's words made Twilight's heart ache.
If I could give myself up to fix this, I would. We both know the folly of such a fantasy,
Luna said consolingly.
Thou knows I hate it too, but it must be done. And if we do not escape, there shall be no pony to return and rescue Twilight and her friends.
Both ponies fell silent as the sound of the door opening interrupted them. Armored hooves clicked against the floor, followed by a new speaker. Princesses? Shining Armor's strained voice nearly sent Twilight to her knees. Some of the scouts came back. I don't know how much longer we'll be able to hold out here. He hesitated before asking, What are your orders?
No orders yet, Captain,
Celestia said. Unlike the uncertainty from mere seconds before, now she spoke with calm confidence, all signs of exhaustion or doubt gone from her voice.
Allow my sister and I to consult a moment longer.
Yes, ma'am. Shining Armor stomped a quick salute, then trotted away. The door squealed on its hinges, the anxious chatter from outside briefly leaking through before it shut.
Thy lies serve thee well,
Luna said.
But they will not stop a changeling army.
Forcing herself back into motion, Twilight crept further down the stairs to the landing. She poked one eye around the corner, spotting Celestia. Luna was standing out of sight. Now that she was alone with her sister again, Celestia had dropped the facade of certainty. Her eyes darted about uncertainly, her shoulders slumped and her voice wary.
We could use the amulets. The amulets?
Luna echoed incredulously.
We did not extract them from the castle to use them, sister. The opposite, in fact. We're alicorns. They won't affect us like they would a mortal pony.
Celestia turned away from Luna, facing the wall of windows through which she could see the crowd standing outside.
And they were created for our use. If ever there was a time, we put them behind us,
Luna cautioned sternly.
It was thine idea. And you're the one that said we should keep using them,
Celestia said, turning and staring intently to where Twilight assumed Luna was standing.
Think of all the lives we could save, Luna.
There was a long moment where neither sister said anything. Twilight frowned, considering what she had heard. What amulets were they talking about? Cadence had hidden the shards of 3 amulets in her lab, the amulet she said Celestia had used to flood the world. Was this the first step on the path that led Celestia to that terrible decision? Luna was the one to break the silence.
Thou art correct, as always,
she said stiffly. The tinkle of magic drifted across the room, and a couple seconds later, 3 amulets floated into Twilight's view. Each one had a vibrant gemstone set into an elaborate golden neckpiece, a sparkling sapphire that glittered like the ocean on a clear night, a verdant emerald that appeared to writhe with life, and a brilliant ruby that seemed to throb within its frame like a beating heart.
Take care, sister. You know me, Luna,
Celestia said wanly as she accepted the amulets in her own magic.
Be ready. The changelings will not sit idle once they realize what we're trying.
Celestia walked out of view, and a few seconds later Twilight heard the door open and swing shut. She looked to Midnight, who was crouched low beside her.
Your princess is alone,
she said.
We should attempt to confront her.
Twilight nodded.
Let me talk to her. Maybe here she'll be able to recognize me. And if not,
Twilight grimaced.
Then we'll try something else.
Straightening up, Twilight took a step forward and nearly walked straight into Princess Luna. She stiffened, looking up and meeting the princess's angry glare. Her long horn glowed, silvery light reflecting off the walls.
Thou dost not belong here.
Twilight's vision burst into searing white. She flinched, stumbling back as stars popped in her eyes and her ears rang, followed a second later by a sudden lurching sensation in her stomach. It felt like she was falling up, drifting off the ground with increasingly sickening speed. Twilight smacked to a stop against hard earth. She groaned, blinking the blurriness from her eyes and struggling to her hooves.
I'm getting sick of these games, little flower,
Midnight growled.
We're bumbling around like blind fools and no closer to our goal.
Twilight rubbed at her head, looking up and taking in her surroundings. Dark trees flanked her in every direction, the thick canopy blocking almost all light.
I think we're making progress. Ow. Every time we've seen Luna, she sent us closer to the present. But why does she toy with us like this? We've come to save her, and she forces us through this maze of memories.
Twilight sighed as she pushed herself into a trot, weaving between tree trunks and over gnarled roots.
We must be almost there. The last dream was only a month before the floods.
The undergrowth was just as thick as the canopy, leaves and twigs crunching under hoof as she squeezed through it.
No matter how long it takes us, we can't give up. This is our best chance at fixing things.
Though she didn't say it out loud, she knew Midnight would hear the unspoken implication. If they failed here, they didn't have anything else to fall back on. Despite her determination, Twilight could already feel the mental strain weighing on her. The mix of fresh mysteries, revelation, and emotional turmoil was exhausting, but she couldn't allow it to slow her down. She just had to bottle it up, every question and heartache, and focus on moving ahead, no matter how strangely hollow it made her feel. After a few minutes of walking, it became clear to Twilight that they were in the Everfree Forest. Even if she couldn't tell where exactly inside the haunted wood they were, the endless, indistinguishable wall of trees in every direction couldn't be anywhere else. It was strange, seeing the forest as it used to be again. She had only been in it a few times before the floods, and in her most recent visit it had been resting far under the waves. She hadn't had any chance to peek under the canopy back then, but now she found herself imagining what it looked like. A flash of sunlight ahead of her pulled her from her thoughts. She quickened into a trot, jumping through a break in the trees and coming out onto a rocky ledge. Ahead of her, across a rope bridge gently swaying in the wind, was the castle of the two sisters. Twilight glanced towards Midnight before starting across the bridge. She couldn't help but compare the castle to how it had appeared when she had found it at the bottom of the ocean. Compared to its flooded state, the ancient stones looked almost pristine as she walked through the arched entryway. The tapestries on the walls, faded and threadbare, still retained their color and intricate embroidery. She knew she was only walking through an old memory, but nonetheless, it felt like she had traveled back in time. Her ears twitched at a muffled sound from ahead, barely audible over the clomping of her hooves. She paused, tilting her head and angling her ears until it came again. A pained shout, coming from deeper inside the castle.
It's coming from the throne room,
Midnight said, stepping ahead.
where we found her. The expedition!
Twilight's horn glowed as she channeled her magic into the form of a hasty teleportation spell.
The researchers that were working out of my library sent an expedition here with Princess Luna. This must be where she put herself to sleep.
With a crack and a flash, she flung herself across the castle. The castle was quiet when she reappeared outside the grand double doors of the throne room, tapestries fluttering around her as she displaced the air. As the lingering sparkles from her teleportation faded, she realized that it was darker, too. The sunlight that had been streaming through the windows replaced with the pale white glow of the moon. One door was cracked open just enough for a pony to slip through, obscuring what awaited on the other side. Slowly, Twilight crept forward, poking her head through the gap. Princess Luna sat in the center of the circular chamber. Her head hung low, and her shoulders slumped. Her wings drooped beside her, and long feathers splayed out over the floor. Her astral mane billowed about as if in the midst of a hurricane, the clear night sky usually held within contaminated by a dark red nebula that twisted across it in angry tendrils. There were ponies scattered around her, all lying down with their eyes closed and expressions peaceful. A couple wore the armor of royal guards, but most were dressed in simple saddlebags, hats, and jackets. Many of them were unicorns, and from what few cutie marks she could see, Twilight assumed this was the research party that had accompanied the princess into the Everfree. They weren't breathing. Luna remained totally still in the middle of the scene, facing away from the door. Her billowing mane was the only movement in the room. Twilight glanced to her side, exchanging looks with Midnight. Just as Twilight was steeling herself to step inside, a trio of other ponies walked cautiously into the room from a smaller side door. They wore armor like the royal guards, but instead of gold, their bodies were wrapped in polished silver. Each one had the distinctive slitted eyes and leathery wings of a bat pony, and their hooves made no sound as they approached the princess. "Your Highness?" the lead bat pony asked.
Do not approach me,
Luna whispered, drawing away from them. The bat pony stopped a respectful distance away. "What happened?" Luna didn't say anything for a long moment. Twilight's throat tightened as she thought back to her own past, how she had felt when she realized she had hurt one of her closest friends. In that moment, she had wished more than anything to take it back. She would have given anything, even her own life, to go back just a few seconds and try another path. The days following that moment had been the darkest days of her life, and not just because she spent them at the bottom of the ocean, surrounded by bodies.
I have committed a terrible crime,
Luna said, her voice hoarse.
Leave me here.
The bat ponies frowned, exchanging looks between themselves. We can't leave you here, Your Highness. It's dangerous.
Dangerous to whom?
Luna countered, a bitterness creeping into her voice.
Dost thou not see the breathless sleepers around me? I cannot control myself.
Her shoulders shuddered as she paused to let out a choking sob.
If you stay, then I will hurt you. Bring the bodies back home for burial and leave me here among the monsters, or you shall hang for treason!
The bat ponies stayed where they were. They looked between each other in confusion before one spoke up. We have our oaths, Your Highness. We're not afraid of you.
Fools!
Luna uttered the word with more exhaustion than disdain.
You should be. How can you not fear a goddess that fears herself?
We have our oaths, the guard repeated, and our faith. We will stay with you. Luna let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob.
I cannot say whether thy loyalty is a blessing or a curse, but I will take solace in it.
Finally, she lifted her head, looking towards the bat ponies, and Twilight could see the blood tears streaming down her cheeks and the fangs poking past her lips.
Silverstar, return to thy kin and bid them flee into the night. I do not know if my sister will defeat this corruption, but thou art not bound to serve her in my absence.
Silverstar dipped his head and stepped back. What of yourself, Your Highness?
I will remain here. I know not for how long, but thou shalt not come look for me. When it is time, I shall call.
She looked sadly to the other two bat ponies in turn, who stiffened to attention.
These two shall be my guardians until then.
As you wish, Your Highness. Silverstar lifted his head. Nox Impavida. Luna gave him a small nod and a wan smile.
Nox Impavida.
After several seconds of hesitation, Silverstar turned in place and marched out of the chamber, leaving Luna alone with the two other silver-armored guards. She drew in a deep breath and let out a heavy sigh, looking up at the moon through a crumbled hole high in the chamber's walls.
Lay down and close thine eyes, my faithful guardians,
she said. The guards did as they were told, one lying down on either side of their princess. They closed their eyes and rested their heads on their forelegs, their tails curling around their flanks. The soft tinkle of magic drifted through the air as Luna's slender horn began to glow. A sudden wave of drowsiness washed over Twilight. She stumbled the rest of the way through the door, struggling to keep her eyes open, and fell onto her side. She didn't feel the hard stone catch her. She felt as if she was falling through a thick bed of clouds, floating down on a cool wind like a twirling leaf in autumn. She tried to find the ground, feeling out with a hoof, but no matter what direction she reached in, she felt only the bare wisps of sensation that would disappear so fast she wasn't sure if she was feeling anything at all. A tingling hoof pressed against hers, and she saw her own eyes looking back at her in the dark, slitted and bloodshot. Twilight jerked her head out of the water. She was lying on her side in a shallow, gently sloshing lake, the water as smooth as glass. Reflected within it, she saw a sky split in two, one side a dark, throbbing red, roiling clouds swirling around a blood moon that rotated and twisted in place like a huge, angry eye. The other was a clear night sky, the twinkling stars swaying to and fro, like tiny candles bobbing on the surface of a lake. There was a gentle rain drizzling from above, each drop sending little ripples across the water. And in the waves, she caught glimpses of other things, burning cities, marching armies, smiling ponies. Luna's parallel dreams, each one blinking in and out of existence in a heartbeat. Twilight stood, shaking the drowsiness from her head. And there, resting in the middle of the lake, peacefully on the little island in the center, lit by the luminescence of the flowers and mushrooms, slept Princess Luna.